I've never really talked about this before. So I have a special guest. Her name is Shelby Kirillin. And Shelby is the founder and president of a company down in Richmond, Virginia called A Peaceful Passing. And Shelby is what's called an end-of-life doula, but I'm going to call her a death coach if she's okay with that. So Shelby, welcome. And how did I do with that? Is death coach is it a fair way to describe you?
It is. It very much, and I've been called, some people, one of my clients called me a transitional life coach. I was like, that is a big word. I have been called death doula, end of life doula, end of life coach, death coach. So all the above.
And you're good with any of those?
All of them.
Yes. Okay. Because I've got a pet peeve with life coach. I get lumped into that. Motivational coach, I've said this before, it drives me crazy. But what exactly is a doula, a death coach, end of life? What do you do? Okay, and how did you get into it?
Okay, loaded questions. Okay, so first we'll get you. So just a doula. So that is a Greek word for a woman who serves, and is more times than not in our culture associated with birth, people having birth doulas. And what a birthing doula does is they support the laboring woman and their partner through the laboring process. And so this is an end of life doula. So if you want to think of it, we labor into life and we labor out of life. You know, death is not a moment. For some, death is a few days, some a few weeks, and some are many, many years of dying. And so an end of life doula supports the person that's dying and the family or the support structure at the end of their life, coaching them through that period of their life.
Okay.
How I got into it. So I am an ICU nurse, more specifically a neurotrauma ICU nurse for over 20 years. And in that time of nursing, I saw a lot of, as you can imagine, deaths. And I got tired of seeing people add on additional pain and anxiety to an already sad process. You know, as you and I had already talked, death is sad. It should be sad. It meant you love deeply. But there is a self-imposed pain and anxiety that our culture in particular, our industrialized Western culture, puts on this process. And every now and then in my ICU experience, I would see families who, it's actually a very specific memory. I was walking into a room of my patient as a nurse. It was an older gentleman dying. His wife and his grown children were around the bedside. And I would describe it in the words like loving and warm and nurturing and beautiful, like just beautiful. They were sitting around, they were talking about his life. He was coherent every once in a while, and he ended up dying on my shift. So then the next time I had a shift, I had almost the exact same situation. Older gentleman who was ending his death was coming, wife, adult children, and it was cold and sterile and uncomfortable and filled with anxiety. The kind of room you walk into and you want to like immediately like walk back out of. And unfortunately, that's more the experiences I was having, at least in the ICUs. And so for a very long time, for years, I sat and I was like, okay, why? Wouldn't everyone want the first death I explained with those adjectives? But why are we getting the second death that I was talking about? And so I just started by just reading voraciously to the point where, you know, my husband, I had a whole stack of books on my bedside table. It was like all these death and dying, you know, Die Wise, you know, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, Advice for Future Corpses. And so
that's exciting.
Mike was fine. Yeah, super exciting. So yeah, Mike was like, oh, could you just try like a fun, like romantic book every once in a while? I don't know. So and that's kind of what I really realized was needed in our culture is, and what I kind of deduced is the families that were able to have those deaths that I had described in the more positive adjectives, they weren't afraid to acknowledge what's happening. They weren't afraid to talk about what's happening. They weren't afraid to sit with those uncomfortable, sad feelings with each other. And I saw a role for people to help those conversations, because it's hard. I couldn't doula my own family. You know, you're losing someone you dearly love. Your heart is being crushed. Right. So long and the short of it, that's how I saw it. So kind of my end game, my end goal, if you will, is really just to change how we die in our culture. Is to show people that it can be done differently.
Yeah, I got it. I got it. So, how is this different? This is a question you brought up to me, but how is this, what you do, different than, say, what hospice does?
Yeah. So, you know, I think the support I give around end of life care is very much the sole work of what hospice brought into our country in the late 60s and early 70s, which blew my mind when I realized that that's how, I mean, hospice has not been around, you know, that long. But unfortunately, it got sucked up into the moneymaker of, you know, Medicare, Medicaid, and a Western business model. And unfortunately, you know, they're charging for hours and time. And that is in disagreement with more of the heart work that I do. There are amazing hospice, you know, nurses and social workers and chaplains. But when you have a caseload of like 40 people, I have a dear friend who's a hospice social worker. She's like, I'm just doing placements and finding next of kin. She's like, I would love to be able to sit down with someone who's dying and coach them through or talk with them what they're experiencing or their loved one. She's like, I don't have time. I don't get really paid for that, or unless somebody flags me into a family situation. And same with the nurses and chaplains. You know, so to answer your question, there's a couple differences. One is I can be brought in at any time. You know, to meet the requirements of hospice, you have to, you know, with all good, most likely you have less than 6 months to live. So you're all these like criteria to meet. Anybody can meet with me. I actually have had people who don't even have a terminal diagnosis or advanced age, but wanted to sit and talk and start doing some of these legacy projects. I am fee for service. So I'm hoping that we'll follow the trend of birthing doulas, that eventually you could get paid out of the HSA, but that's not the case right now. And so if I could paint a picture of my normal clients, they find me well before they're even able to go into hospice. While I'll do any death, most recently has been mostly cancers. And it's a picture where it's everywhere. Cure is off the table. They're, you know, doing palliative radiation or chemo to extend what life they have. But as they say, the trajectory is set. This is going to happen. How do I own it? How do I, like, death is probably going to be within the next year. What do I need to do? So sometimes it's more of the administrivia around death and dying. Right. It's looking at paperwork. It's looking at that kind of stuff. But what a lot of times it is kind of going back, is sitting with somebody where they are and sitting and doing legacy projects with their loved ones. It's writing their vigil plan. It's coming to grips with their finite time here. It's talking about their regrets and unfinished business of being human and working through those. And then, so that's something that almost all my clients have me before they even enter hospice. And then when they enter hospice, I work alongside hospice as kind of part of their care team.
So before I knew you, I didn't even know this was really a service. You know, I didn't think about this as something that we should be thinking about. So yes. How much work do you have to do to create the idea that this exists, or am I like alone in this? Am I like one of the only people that doesn't know this?
No, you're not. You are like your norm.
Yeah. Can I make an appointment, by the way? I wouldn't mind like scheduling something and getting this going.
Honestly, that's probably the easiest time when there's not this diagnosis or advanced stage looming over you.
Yeah.
But no, 5 years ago, it was way worse. I feel like every year I've been doing this. So I would say I'm officially been a death doula 5.5 years. It's gotten more and more, I don't want to say popular. That's a little exaggerative. It's becoming, people are more aware of it. You know, I think as the baby boomers are getting older, certainly as COVID is here, people are talking about death. People are realizing it's a thing. but no, you are not the only person who's never heard of it.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, but as a coach, primarily a business coach, a communication coach, my job takes me into so many directions with people, especially during a time like this. The things that I hear from people today during COVID times are much different than what I heard from them, say, 2 years ago. It's a much more personal relationship, and you learn things about people that I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm not deserving of knowing that. But it's forcing it's forcing me to look at the entire person. But what I find with a lot of people is, you talk about confronting the reality of death, like just acknowledging and accepting this is going to happen. But in life, I see many, many, many people who can't confront the reality of what is happening while they're here, let alone the ultimate end game, which is I'm going to be gone. I'm going to be gone. But so confronting that I suck at my job, or I'm a terrible husband. By the way, this isn't about me, but whatever. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a drug abuser. I mean, who knows, right?
Yeah.
People. I would say that's the biggest thing people struggle to confront, is like their biggest embarrassments and shame, and they can go their entire lives without acknowledging or accepting or talking about anything. But now you're on the tail end of that.
Mm-hmm.
What are your clients like at that point? Are they already like self-actualized, where they've gone through a period of time where they've already accepted things throughout, or are you getting them to accept the ultimate outcome?
I am not getting them to accept anything. And while I don't know coaching strategies, I go in with no agenda. I go in with no outcome in mind, because it's not my role to say this is what you should be doing with your death or your dying or your life, and I'm not solving for family conflicts for the last 40 years. I have no magic ingredients. Believe me, I don't.
Okay. All right. But does that come up?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I say all my clients teach me something. I don't think we're truly ready to accept death until truly, when we're on actually this is happening, until we're literally on our deathbeds. Even people who have terminal diagnosis and they're seeing the downward spiral, they're seeing, their loss of control of different parts of their life or even their body. They're like these little micro griefs they have, but it's not until, I've been working with people for months, and they're, 2 weeks away from their death, and they're like, this is going to happen. This is happening. And I think as humans, it's a protective mechanism. We really can't take in the fullness of our death. So it would be silly for me to think that I could certainly give that to them, but rather it's sitting with somebody. And honestly, sometimes it's just listening. Our culture, we don't like people to be in pain, whether that's physical or emotional. We want to buffer anything negative because it's a trigger in us. Mm-hmm. So, frequently you'll hear families, say, oh, don't talk that way, or, oh, I don't want to talk about that. That's too depressing. Or don't worry, there'll be another NIH study, Mom. Yeah. And what it's doing, it's negating the person's feelings. And so instead I sit there and I acknowledge, so I understand you're 40 and you have 3 kids and you're dying and you're really mad and you're pissed. Mm-hmm. Tell me more. What is that like for you? Instead of buffering it, be like, let's not think that way. Or, no, you're going to have more years with them, and so honestly, there's all these wonderful things and activities I can do with people at the end of life. But what I have found the dying want most is just someone to actively listen to them.
Did you ever see that movie with Johnny Depp, The Professor?
No.
I don't think it was an overly popular movie, but during the beginning of the pandemic, it was playing on Showtime one night. And so I watched it. And he's a college professor in a terrible marriage. His wife is unfaithful to him. He's got a daughter, college-age daughter, who's disconnected from her parents, and she's going through her relationship issues. And at the beginning of the movie, I won't give the movie away, but he's diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, and he's got a matter of a very, very short period of time to live, and he's young. And the rest of the movie is basically him accepting the harsh reality of he he squandered his life in many ways, but he makes a bunch of really questionable decisions throughout the movie, just like living out every random, yeah, screw it, I'll do that. And it's hysterical to watch, but it's sad at the same time that he never really, I guess he never saw the end coming. And so he never took
Yeah.
advantage of the time that he's got here. But you say, well, you got to go in with no judgment or no outcome. Well, the outcome's already decided. That's where we're going, right? And I think you brought up COVID earlier, and I feel like we are preying on the greatest fear that human beings have, which is death and dying. And so we're creating this mass chaos around something that is going to happen anyway. We don't want it to happen. I keep talking about that. We don't want it to happen, but it's going to happen. So like we're running from something that we're going to have to confront one way or the other. So why not just get comfortable with it, right? Isn't that kind of what it's all about?
It's one of the few things that we all experience, but nobody talks about, which to me just blows my mind.
Right.
I know you're going to experience something, but I'm not going to tell you about it. I'm not going to tell you what it feels like. I'm not going to tell you how to prepare for it. I'm not going to tell you anything. No expectations. And no wonder we have a whole bunch of anxiety about it.
Yeah.
We don't understand it.
Yeah, I mean, and then the whole process sucks. My mom passed away about a year and a half ago, and it was a very mechanical, gross process. It's like as soon as she passed, they couldn't wait to shove the paperwork in front of us. And hey, sign this, and the next step is to call this one, and we're going to put her in this box. And it was like she was being shipped out of an Amazon factory,
Right.
and the whole, you realize how much of a business this whole thing is. But the thing I remember is like her laying there at the, just listing anyone who hadn't visited her. Oh, well, so-and-so hasn't visited me, and this one hasn't visited me. I'm like, mom, like, is this where we're going? I mean, this is what you're thinking about right now? But it was a cold, lonely experience. And I think like just over the last few months, I've had the unfortunate responsibility of attending a few wakes and funerals. I hate that. I hate the process of, and I know not every religion goes through this, but the idea of going into a funeral home and observing a body in a casket and then going through that whole, I despise the process. Every time I go into it, I turn to my wife. I'm like, don't do this to me. I don't want any of this. I don't want anyone staring at my nose hairs in the casket. Nothing open. I don't even want any of this to happen. Do you get into all that stuff too? Or like,
Yeah.
What's the deal with it? I mean, can we get rid of that stuff? I mean, do people really need this closure? I don't want anyone looking at me, and I don't want to look at anybody in a casket. I really don't.
Honestly, it really varies. It really varies on people's background and religion, beliefs, culture, spirituality. It all plays a part. Some of it, oh my gosh, we could have a whole nother podcast about, our culture and the inability to sit with grief, our inability to sit with anything negative, and we try to, make it go away. So, maybe I'll throw a question back at you is, sitting at a funeral, looking at a funeral is really staring at in the face. And most people will be like, well, I don't want to look at that. So I don't want to do that. Versus, ritual, there's a purpose for ritual. Ritual is to help kind of our spirit or our soul catch up with what has actually happened.
Yeah. Well, no, I agree with you. I agree with the ritual piece. Where I struggle is words are so limiting. You go to it's rare that I go to, you look at it and depending on the funeral home, I'm Catholic. So most of these I've gone to are Catholic. Depending on the, what's the word? The artistic ability of the mortician, you could walk in and say, wow, she looks great. But you could also, yeah. For a dead person, you look really good. And then there's other times like, that's a disaster. Put a blanket over. That's terrible. So like the idea that we need to show somebody lying there, like I don't get that. Like I don't necessarily, me personally, I don't want to see it. But the funeral itself, like there are times you go to a funeral and the eulogy is phenomenal. It absolutely captures the essence of the person in the most complete way. But I find that those eulogies to be few and far between. I feel like it's so limiting. so limiting that now, hey, so-and-so's gone. We're wrapping it up in a bow. Let's go out to eat. Like, I just feel like it needs to continue beyond that. I asked you, the other day, we were talking the other day, and I always have this, I'm like, what the hell happens to us? Is that it? Because part of me believes that's it. But I got to believe, like, deep down, the energy exists somewhere, even though the energy is still out there. I mean, I deep down believe that. What's your take on that whole thing?
No, I totally agree. And it's so great that we're talking about, body care, is the idea of green burials. Have you heard of that?
Green burials?
Yes.
No.
Okay. All right, we have another podcast about after death care.
Okay.
Or maybe I'll give you some great mortician name.
Okay.
So you have your typical Catholic body embalmed. The casket is put in the earth. The earth is lined with concrete. There's also the cremation side, typical cremation, which people have heard of. And then there's a lot more options being investigated, but the other one is a green burial. So you have public spaces that are deemed green burial sites, green burial cemeteries. And it's the whole idea of returning the body to the earth because it still has energy. It still has things to give, but it can be in a casket, but it needs to be a simple pine casket, no metal, no, adhesives, or just in a shroud. There's no headstone. And normally the green burial cemeteries I've been to are quite beautiful. They look like nature preserves. Sometimes you'll have some natural like sculptures around. And it's the whole idea of, I've taken enough from this earth, I'm going to give back to this earth.
Fertilizer, basically.
Fertilizer.
Is that really what it is?
Yeah, there's mushroom suits that you can put on the corpse that help expedite that process.
Yeah.
There's liquid cremation, which is it's not legal yet. Actually, maybe Washington State is trying. And that's basically where instead of fire cremating a body, they actually put it in a bath of lye. And so it's a water cremation. So it decreases the amount of carbon that's being used to burn off a body.
Yeah.
And but you still get ashes. It's just done in a different way. So that's kind of being studied. And so there's lots of things to do with the body. But yeah, I agree. There is energy at the end of life. It does go somewhere. I've heard of family members feeling the energy come into them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's how I want to think about it. I want to think about it like I think about a human being like a television set. Like it's on when it's plugged in. It's a beautiful TV as long as it's plugged in. Same with a computer, but once it's plugged in and the electricity is cut, it's just a thing. It's just this vessel. I think of the body that way. It's just a vessel, and when the electricity is cut, because I believe that's what it is, the electricity gets cut, it still exists. Electricity still exists whether the TV's plugged in or not. I think about that with a person too. I don't know. I'm going off of my cuckoo tangent.
No. But going back to your what you don't want, that's why it's perfect. You need to start writing your wishes for your funeral or for your life celebration or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
you need to talk about. Well, then you need to are you okay? Like if you're a Catholic, Catholics might not be so cool with that. They have their own ritual, and so you need to.
I'm not there for them. I'm there for me. I need to do things my way. I tell my family all the time, no big anything. You can get together and have some fun, but I don't want anything else. I don't no staring at me in a box and no crying at a grave. Throw me overboard. Or put me out with the trash on Monday. Stuff me in the barrels. No one's gonna know, right? Just move on.
So there's so many great things you can do with ashes. You can put them in vinyl records now. You can get blown glass ornaments. Oh, you can do lots of fun stuff.
Yeah, maybe that's what we'll do. We'll talk about that. All right, what about this? Like just people in general. Not everybody has the opportunity to get a little bit more serious. Not everybody has the opportunity to live healthy until the end. I think we underestimate that. Oftentimes we underestimate that we're going to get to that point where we're whatever age and we're going to go off into the sunset like in a beautiful way. But many people don't get that chance. And whether it's disease or an accident or something that causes them not to live out those final years with I hate to use the word dignity, but oftentimes
No,
it is. And so like, how do you reconcile that with somebody? Like it's like there's no way to paint this in a nice way, because it can be an ugly process no matter how we choose to look at it. If you lose your ability to take care of yourself, take a shower, use the bathroom, all those things, it's got to be really tough. It's more than just confronting death. It's probably harder to, how the hell am I going to get to death? I want to get there and I can't. Right? I mean, do you have to deal with that?
A lot of times, and that's like expectation setting. This is what I thought it would be. This is how I thought my life would go.
Yeah.
I thought I would, like going to, I saved up all this money. I would retire. I would, whatever, travel the world, and then exit stage left. And instead, I'm 30. I'm dying. I'm leaving, children, or there are some cultures who they die of, more aggressive things. They have a higher overdose, suicides, murders, homicides that their cultures are having to deal with and reconcile with. And so end of life doulas, it's not just the beginning parts of the planning stage, if you will, but we also do grief and bereavement. So, I can still work with families who have unexpected deaths for, again, suicide, homicide, overdose, to COVID deaths that they didn't see happening. It happened, their loved one was fine, and then all of a sudden went into an ICU. They didn't see them, and their body was returned to them. And so end of life doulas can also do bereavement, because a lot of the things that we do in the pre-planning can also be done in bereavement, like legacy work, writing what this person's life was. Either if the person's there, they can do it for themselves, but if not, family, loved ones, friends can do this type of work. That's part of the grief for them. So we can be on the backside of it as well.
So after the person passes, you're saying that, okay. And are you finding that to be more the norm now?
I wouldn't say more the norm, but I'm hearing more about it. And I've had people reach out more so this year than I have in the past about doing more grief work.
How is your work done primarily for the person who's passing, or is it primarily for the family, or is it equal?
It's really equal. It depends. I've had some people who are dying who really want the one-on-one, like I need someone witnessing this with me, and then I've had other people where it really is more for the living. The dying are like, I'm good. Like it's for them. And I'm with the people who are going to experience the loss and walking that with them. What is their experience of death? What is their expectation of death? Starting anticipatory grief work. That's huge is, I've sat with family members, the one that in mind was in November, and I knew she had a week or two left. And I talked to her partner. I said, this is going to be her first Christmas without her. I said, have you ever thought of that? And just the starting of everybody's in anticipatory grief, but actually making it a thing and calling it a name can be immensely helpful.
Is it more helpful knowing that you're really helping them play through what's ultimately going to happen? They see it before it happens. So when it happens, the anxiety or emotion is a little, I don't know, more palatable, or no?
It certainly is. I phrase it as, I'm a constant in the chaos, because death is chaotic. Even if it is expected, it's chaotic. And I think I mentioned that with you, 200 years ago, as human beings, we knew how to support our dying. We knew what death looked like. The number of, parents that lost children was like 50%. So it was something that there was a very intimate relationship we had with death. Grandma was in the parlor for a day or two. Yeah. People had their roles. Women would go grab the herbs and start cooking. Men would go dig a hole and start building a casket. Like everybody just had this role. And that was taken from us for a number of reasons by a number of different people, groups. Anyway, and we were told that we're not enough and we can't do it. So a lot of, I think, the anxiety comes from the feeling of, I can't control it. I feel helpless in it. I don't have a role in it. What do I do? And so some of it is really giving that knowledge back to our culture. So when I see that, when you're talking about anxiety, you know, when I see that feeling, is sometimes it's as easy as just reminding people, like, this is natural. I know it's scary. I know it's scary to see this or hear this or feel this, but this is our body. This is how our body dies. And this is very natural. And I'm here and I'm not going to leave you. Right. And sometimes that's all that needs to be said. You know, I'm hoping that I work myself out of a job. Sorry, other doulas out there, that because our culture learns to do that again for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I see what you're saying. And I think about, you know, that you mentioned anxiety, and I'm not exactly sure what the true definition of anxiety is, but I would think it has something to do with this perceived loss of control or a lack of understanding about what's going to happen. And I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of people that I just in talking, you know, professionally with people, how much they avoid what's actually happening, or they don't acknowledge what's actually happening. And that's what actually creates the stress and the anxiety and the depression is, I don't want to say these words. I don't want to admit these things. But ultimately, I would think that if you can get somebody to the point where they can accept and admit that, well, this is happening, you know, that you could accept and admit and talk about anything. Like if you can do this, you know, and how often are you dealing with people that I don't even know if how often is the right way to ask it, but what's it like as you're going through this? You've been doing this for a long time. Do you find that people are in a good place? I guess it would depend on how old they are and what the circumstances are. But let's just say I've lived a long life. You know, I'm 90 and I've done a lot. Am I sitting with you saying, hey, you know what? My job's done here. I feel awesome. I'm ready to rock. Or are people looking back, wishing they did things, said things? Is there regret? What do you observe?
Oh, yeah. All in both.
Okay.
All in both. It's really the person. It's how they lived. You know, you had mentioned earlier, people are scared to die. You know, I hate to be cliched, but cliches are there for a reason. You know, we should be more scared of not living.
I totally agree with you. I think that's the key right there, you know, and you know, I've got 3 kids, you've got 3 kids. So I'm sure like as they get older, your kids are slightly younger than mine, but not much. And these are the types of conversations that we have, not about death necessarily, but just all that really matters is what you do today and what you think today and what you're doing to impact somebody else today. That's it. How you look doesn't matter. You know, what you're wearing doesn't matter. You know, how many likes you have on freaking social media doesn't matter. It doesn't
You're
matter.
a parent. You don't know anything. You're dumb.
Yeah. That's true. That's true. But like, it's like all that really matters is what did you do today to make a difference? You know, did you take care of yourself today? Did you help somebody? Did you make a difference for anybody today? And I don't mean go volunteer at a food kitchen or a soup kitchen. I mean, just, did you make an impression on somebody today in a good way? Because you might not have tomorrow. And
I think you can ask that to anybody. Even, you know, I say until you take your last breath. So, you know, can you live today better than you lived yesterday? And if you keep doing the same thing, you know, that is powerful in and of itself.
What's your take on Jack Kevorkian, God rest his soul? You know who he is?
Yes, I know who he is.
What's your opinion on what he did?
Oh, it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag because I do support death with dignity. I feel like, and this is a personal statement, this is our life and our lives. And I think that is, you know, handing over control. You know, I think it's fascinating. Some of the research is showing that even in the places that it is legal, people they're signing up for it or getting the prescriptions filled, but are getting the prescriptions, but not filling them and not taking them. And I feel the people making the decisions clearly have not had long-term, chronic, painful disease processes.
Right.
And so I think it's really easy to say that when, you know, to say that when you're not in their shoes. That being said, I think there is something about the importance of, I feel like, I'd mentioned, dying is just talking about the last couple chapters of our book of life. And talking about death, we're still talking about life. And this tends to be the more sad chapters. But there's a lot of beauty in sadness, and there's a lot of beauty in purpose and anger, and there's a lot of beauty in regret that can come. And so I wouldn't want someone to expedite their passing because they don't want to sit in those more typically looked at negative emotions, because you're missing the beauty that can arrive from them. So I think it depends on the circumstance, but I think it certainly should be allowed.
Okay. So when you say you sit with the negative emotions, what about sitting with the physical suffering?
Right. That's where, like, yeah, that's, everybody should have the right to a pain-free death.
Right. Like I know there's so many people that go through this, but like, I can't, like my biggest worry is that I'm going to be a burden on somebody. I don't want to be. And I know that's it's a psychological barrier, and it hasn't happened. So why think about it? I really don't think about it. But now that we're on this topic, I don't want my wife having to like clean me up in the bathroom.
That is one of the most often said things of people who are dying. I don't want to be a burden on the people I love.
Right. Right. Yeah. And so, and I guess, I mean, but it can be the ultimately what ends up happening, not the burden part, but look, you're going to need some help and you're going to need some care. You can't just throw a blanket over the person and pretend they're not there. What do you think happens to us? Just out of curiosity.
Man. It really depends on, I definitely think it's not, I don't believe that it's just the end, that like, that's it. Like, I believe my soul, my spirit goes on. Mm-hmm. It goes on to have other experiences in a different, I don't want to use the word realm because that sounds a little too woo-woo, in a different way. I think some of my protection around my heart is I have to know that I will see my parents again or my mom again. I have to know that I will see my children again one day, because the idea of really never seeing those people that mean so much in my life is too distressing for me. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if that's where I go with, but I'm more in the camp of my spirit, my soul has another experience. We just don't know what that is yet. Not here, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the older I get, the more my brain goes off into totally different directions.
Well, especially because the stories you hear from people either that are dying or who have experienced a death of a loved one, and them either, the stories of, I've had someone, her mom had just died. They were in the hospital, her dad, and she came out and they were sitting in the waiting room just crying, and her mom's cell phone, she got a call and it was from her mom's cell phone. Mm-hmm. Her mom's cell phone was like in her mom's belongings, like locked away. Like the people who her grandfather loved to collect, or always gave them coins, and her grandfather just died, and she said she was going to the bathroom right before shower. She's like, I was sitting on the toilet and I could tell there was nothing on the ground, and I took a shower. When I came out, there were pennies. There was 2 pennies on the rug, the mat right in front of the shower. Enough of those stories mm-hmm. that I have heard over and over and over and over again, and people that do what I do have heard the same stories. I have to believe that there is something.
It's funny you say that. I had a friend pass away a few years ago, and his wife had gone to see, I don't know what they're called, but somebody who would have,
like a medium or something.
Yeah. One of those people, I think, somebody like that. And they had, and I think she was just looking for signs or anything. And I believe, I'm probably hacking the story, the person said, well, he's been leaving you signs in the form of dimes, the coins. And she told us this story, this a couple of years ago. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And so it was like that next day I was opening up the silverware drawer. It's like it's not even a silverware drawer. It's like a junk drawer with a few utensils in it. And I opened it up and something came flying out, and I shut. I'm like, and I said, I forget who was, my wife, one of my kids, like something just flew out of this drawer. It was my wife. I said, something just dropped on the floor. I can't find it. And I'm looking around, And what's right on the ground right there? A dime. I got the chills immediately because I just heard the story and I'm like, son of a bitch. What are the odds? And so,
Exactly.
stuff like that, like it's like, I think you want to believe that if you look hard enough or you focus, there is something there. I just think that we have to not look at this stuff in the traditional way. And I would think that's kind of what you're doing, is helping people, or maybe go back to look at it for what it is and maybe having a less mechanical view about it.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know what I'm saying. It's a heavy topic that I'm trying to make light of, but.
Well, no, but I mean, it's going back to, we treat death right now really medically, like that you become a diagnosis, and that's what we do in our culture. And just like I tell my son, 30 and 40 years ago, if you looked at how we birthed babies in this world, the mom was by herself, sometimes anesthetized, on her back, pushing. And there was the wonderful baby boomers who said, yeah, no, my body knows what to do. Get off of it. I might want some support medically, but this is my body. I own it. Let me own this experience. And this generation, I think, is the one that they brought birthing doulas into practice. And I think they're the ones that are bringing end-of-life doulas into mainstream, because they're shedding a light on how we do death in our culture. And right now it's really medicalized. And there is a group of people in our culture who want to say, we know how to do this. Our body knows how to do this. Support me. Support me in this. But death is not just a medical experience. It's an emotional and a psychological and a spiritual experience. But there's not a whole lot of support around that.
Would you say that it's easy for you to find clients? Everyone could be a client, right?
Yes, that's the one good thing. As my husband, the world are my clients. I mean, I say that tongue in cheek.
Yeah, I hear that.
Edit that one out.
Yeah, Shelby, I hear the vast majority of people actually pass away. From what I understand, and don't quote me on this, I believe they pass away. So, but I mean, but how do you? So obviously, everyone could be one, but how do you identify those that are actually open to this conversation?
Honestly, yes, I have a website and brochures, and I do speaking engagements. It's always word of mouth. That's fine. And I just say the universe allows people to find me when they're ready to find me. Okay. And more so than not, I know that's such probably a woo woo, and it's a business person finding to be like, that's crazy. But I really do. I really do. That's people find me when they're ready to find me. And it's almost always through word of mouth.
Okay.
Even though I do all these other kind of things.
So I'll give you the final word. What do you want people to know? What haven't I asked?
Final word. Oh, okay. Just that, I think, well, for a myriad of reasons, and I think we touched on it before, what we don't understand, we fear, whether it's religion or gender, sexuality, like what we don't understand, we fear. And I think death is a huge one. And when you talk about it, it puts it to me in this 4-dimension that I can hold. And I'm not saying I'm excited about dying, because I'm not, but it shines a light in that dark corner, and it makes you be like, oh, okay. Like it's more tangible. It takes that fear away. And also that, death is so beautiful and so sacred. And for people who have had the privilege of seeing someone's first breath and a person's last breath, it's the same feeling. It's this amazing feeling of like, wow, I was just honored to witness, like I said, the first breath or last breath. And, our culture does all these things to prepare families, a woman, their partner, with birthing, from classes and books and parties and discussions and forums everywhere, that, birth and death are supposed to counterbalance each other and feel how unbalanced it is. And that if we put that energy into the dying experience, and I, as a Western trained practitioner, I own this too. I have seen people in my industry and, physicians and nurses, death is actually happening and them deny it, saying, oh, if you could just keep down, some toast, I can give you some rescue chemo. And that's kind of like, could you imagine if a woman was literally in labor, birthing a child, and be like, this really isn't happening. If you could, I don't know, just walk around, it won't happen. Right. And what we're seeing is there is a side effect to treating death this way. And the side effect is what we are in now. This negative space, it hurts the grief and bereavement. It doesn't allow us to heal. It doesn't allow closure for a life or for a family. And so, but to be able to not be afraid to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Sometimes I was like, oh, I'm the person that like, I not only talk about the elephant in the room, I paint it like pink and I put like Christmas lights on it and I dance it around the elephant. Like we talk about the elephant. It's those people that are able to talk about the elephant in the room that have those abilities to have the death, like I said, that use the adjectives like nurturing and beauty and love. You know, adjectives, our culture, if I said those, they would not normally attach them to death.
All right, now we can't have the final word because I want to keep asking you questions. You keep let me ask you a couple more questions.
Yeah.
This whole Western culture thing, it feels like we're ass backwards over here. Growing up, all I heard about was how great, the U.S. Healthcare system was, and doctors here are the best doctors. You can't trust doctors outside the country. And my grandfather would, if you weren't born in this country, he wanted nothing to do with you. He was unhealthy as all hell. He smoked like a chimney. He was dying like for years, but he wouldn't trust it. Like, but the thing is I think there's a lot of I'm sorry. There's no final word here because I got to keep asking questions. We're keeping people it's like we're trying to set records, keeping people alive and unhealthy over here. It feels like to me. Mm-hmm. But when you look outside, you talk about non-Western culture. What do you mean? Like, what are you seeing or observing in those environments that isn't happening here?
So there's a couple of things. Third world countries, for all, maybe people look at them in their negative light, they do death way better than us. People that still have maybe a tribal nature to them, who live in tight-knit communities that still have ritual and ceremony, that still support one another in that way, they're the ones who are doing death right. And so not everybody needs an end-of-life doula. There are people who do live in the United States who still have a really grounded, maybe their families have kept those aspects of generations together about how to experience the death and dying. Yeah. But yeah, our culture, with how many advances we've had over the last, 50, 75 years in medicine, we have turned our back on death just as fast.
So when I listen to you talk, I get this vision in my head about planning a massive party. And we've had so many at our house over the years, but the planning that goes into it, the food preparation, if you have a tent or a jumpy or whatever, over the years, all the stuff, the music that goes into it, it's awesome. People come, they rip it up. Sometimes they stay too late, but it's awesome. And that's birth. Death is the next morning, getting up, looking at looking at the house, looking at the yard. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I'd walk out in my backyard, just a disaster, just bending down to pick up all the gross cups and whatever was, and that's death. It's just this is what happens. What a great life. What an awesome, and then it ends so anticlimactically. And so I think what you're offering is we can actually clean up the yard the next day without a hangover. It doesn't have to feel that way, right? I mean,
wow, we're really getting metaphors now. But I mean, that's the death can be the party, the this was big, what happened, whatever we're celebrating. Yes, the next day. All right, well, the next day cleanup, that's grief and bereavement. That's looking at those red Solo cups on the beer pong table and be taking a moment to be wow, that was a really good party. Or God, I loved it when I totally won and beat my neighbor. Yeah. And then you continue to clean up, and then you might dry heave a little bit, but then you might reminisce about oh my God, this was so worth it. Oh God, this was so worth it. Yeah. And you keep cleaning up. And so I think the cleanup isn't the death. The cleanup is the grief.
Yeah, maybe it's just maybe it's looking at what's about to be cleaned up as the death, and then you go through it. No, I get it. I get it. Terrible analogy. I couldn't
No,
help
I
it.
love that analogy.
Well, as you were describing the beauty and the spa-like thing with birth and then death, I'm like, oh, it's that hangover. It's just brutal. Um, okay, all right. Well, look, I could keep asking you ridiculous questions. I'm glad you allowed me to be a little bit light about this, but I do think it's a serious topic, one that we're all going to have to confront at some point.
But no
So,
more serious than birth. It's it's an experience that we have as humans,
yeah,
and that's what it is. It's meeting humanity with humanity. It's part of our life. It doesn't need to be all. Wah, wah, wah. You don't need to start, playing the mortuary music.
yeah, yeah. No, none of that. No, none of that.
Yeah, none of that.
Like I'd probably want you to plan it out for me. I'm going to tell you what I want, and just I want a proposal on how to do this, like as painlessly as possible, and let's get it rocking. I that's how I want to do it. All right, Shelby. Well, I'd love to do one of these again. If you have another spin-off topic off of this one, I'm serious. I think it's awesome because I coach people for a living, but not as they
Death
approach.
coach.
Yeah, like you bring it full circle. It's fantastic. It's an awesome topic. I think more of us need to start talking about it and looking at it in a healthier way. So I appreciate it. It's been, I think, 18 years since I last saw you. So I'm glad you're doing well. I'm glad your business is doing well, and I hope people listen to this.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. It's so good talking to you and hearing your sweet little Boston accent again.
Do I still have it?
Yes, you do.
All right. Thanks for hanging with me.